In ancient Rome, 73 AD, Senator Marcus Aurelius Corvus holds immense power in the Senate, known for his unwavering principles and devotion to Roman law. His daughter, Livia Corvus, 28 years old, is an intelligent and spirited woman who has rejected countless suitors, much to her father's frustration. She spends her days studying philosophy and secretly observing the gladiatorial games, fascinated by the raw courage of the warriors. Cassius Maximus, once a decorated Roman centurion, was falsely accused of treason by corrupt officials and stripped of his rank. Sold into slavery, he became the most feared gladiator in the Colosseum, fighting not just for survival, but to one day clear his name and reclaim his honor. His rage burns as bright as his skill with the sword. When Livia discovers evidence that could prove Cassius's innocence, she begins secretly visiting his chambers in the gladiator barracks. What starts as a mission of justice slowly transforms into forbidden love between a senator's daughter and a slave warrior. But their dangerous romance threatens to destroy everything: her father's political career, Cassius's chance at freedom, and their own lives. The story explores themes of honor, sacrifice, social class barriers, and the power of love to transcend even the most impossible circumstances, building toward a heart-wrenching climax that will test whether love can truly conquer all. The crowd's bloodthirsty roar echoed through the marble corridors of the Colosseum as Livia Corvus pressed herself against the cold stone wall, her heart hammering against her ribs. She shouldn't be here. A senator's daughter had no business in the gladiator quarters, especially not at night when the torches cast dancing shadows that seemed to whisper of forbidden secrets. But she had to see him. The scroll clutched in her trembling hands contained information that could change everything. Evidence that the most feared gladiator in Rome was not the criminal the courts had branded him, but a hero wrongly condemned, Marcus Cassius Maximus, the gladiator of death. The man who had never lost a fight, the warrior whose very name sent shivers through the spines of both spectators and fellow fighters alike. Livia had spent months researching, following whispered rumors, and bribing scribes to access sealed records. What she discovered had shattered her world. The man who fought like a demon possessed in the arena below was once centurion Cassius Maximus, decorated veteran of the Germanic campaigns, loyal son of Rome, who had been destroyed by the very system her father served so faithfully. A heavy door creaked open at the end of the corridor. Livia's breath caught as she heard the unmistakable sound of chains dragging against stone. The gladiators were returning from their evening meal. She had to move now, or lose her chance forever. Her silk stola whispered against the rough walls as she crept forward, following the directions she had memorized. Third door on the left, the informant had said. The cell of the champion. Her hands shook as she approached, knowing that behind this door waited either her salvation or her doom. The heavy wooden door stood slightly ajar. Through the gap she could see the flickering light of an oil lamp, illuminating scarred shoulders and dark hair. He sat with his back to the door, methodically cleaning a gladius with practiced precision. Even in the confines of his cell, Cassius Maximus radiated the controlled power of a caged lion. Livia's resolve nearly crumbled. What was she thinking? She was about to enter the chamber of the most dangerous man in Rome, a man who killed for the entertainment of crowds, a man whose very existence was built upon violence and death. But then she remembered the documents in her hands, the truth that had been buried beneath lies and political machinations. Taking a breath that felt like swallowing fire, she pushed the door open and stepped inside. Cassius spun with lightning reflexes, the gladius rising to her throat before she could even blink. His grey eyes were like winter storms, cold and deadly, scanning her from head to toe. For a moment that stretched like eternity, neither moved. The blade at her neck was so sharp, she could feel its kiss against her skin without it even touching. Well, his voice was like gravel, mixed with honey rough from years of commanding troops and roaring battle cries, yet somehow melodious. What do we have here? A senator's daughter playing at being brave, or perhaps... His eyes narrowed as he took in her fine clothing, her carefully arranged hair, the obvious signs of wealth and privilege. Perhaps a very foolish young woman who has lost her way. Livia forced herself to meet his gaze, though every instinct screamed at her to run. I am Livia Corvus, daughter of Senator Marcus Aurelius Corvus, and I have not lost my way. I know exactly where I am, Centurion Maximus. The effect of her words was immediate and electric. The gladius trembled almost imperceptibly in his grip, and something flickered across his features: surprise, pain, recognition. The title she had used, centurion instead of gladiator, struck him like a physical blow. "That man is dead," he said slowly, but his voice had lost its menacing edge. "You speak to a slave now, nothing more." "The man I seek is very much alive," Livia replied, raising the scroll between them like a shield, "and I have proof of his innocence." The words hung in the air between them like incense, heavy and intoxicating. Cassius lowered his sword slowly, never taking his eyes from her face. The small cell suddenly felt even smaller, charged with an energy that had nothing to do with the threat of violence and everything to do with the far more dangerous threat of hope. "Show me," he whispered. Livia's hands trembled as she unrolled the parchment, the lamplight casting wavering shadows across the ancient text. Cassius moved closer, close enough that she could smell the leather and steel that clung to him, close enough to see the network of scars that mapped a lifetime of battles across his muscled chest and arms. Each mark told a story of survival, of pain endured and overcome. 3 years ago, she began, her voice barely above a whisper, "you were accused of selling military intelligence to Germanic tribes. The evidence presented claimed you had taken gold in exchange for Roman battle plans." Her finger traced along the faded ink. "But this document, sealed by the military tribunal and hidden in the Senate archives, tells a different story." Cassius's jaw clenched, the muscles working beneath his skin like coiled serpents. "I know what I was accused of. I lived through the trial, if you can call that mockery of justice a trial. But did you know that the real traitor was Tribune Gaius Varro?" Livia looked up, watching as shock and then burning rage flashed across his features. "Did you know that he needed a scapegoat to cover his own crimes and chose you because you had discovered his treachery?" The scroll crackled in the sudden silence. Cassius stared at the document as if it were a serpent about to strike. When he finally spoke, his voice was raw with barely contained emotion. "Varro, that bastard was my friend. We served together for 5 years. I trusted him with my life a dozen times over. He betrayed that trust to save his own skin when the Germanic gold was discovered. This is a confession, written in his own hand, and witnessed by a dying centurion who couldn't bear to carry the secret to his grave. It was sealed and filed away, buried so deep in the archives that it was never meant to see daylight again." Cassius reached out with trembling fingers to touch the parchment, then pulled back as if it burned. The single word carried the weight of 3 years of anguish, of countless nights wondering what he could have done differently, of every man he had killed in the arena while the real traitor lived free. "Why would you risk everything to show me this?" Livia's heart hammered as she met his gaze. How could she explain the nights she had spent, unable to sleep, haunted by the glimpses she caught of him in the arena? How could she tell him that she had fallen in love with the story of a man she had never met, drawn to his strength and honor, even when the world branded him a criminal? "Because truth matters," she said instead, though it was only part of the answer. "Because you were a good man serving Rome, and good men shouldn't die as slaves for crimes they didn't commit." Something shifted in Cassius's expression, a crack appearing in the wall of bitter cynicism that had kept him alive these past 3 years. "And what exactly do you propose I do with this truth, Livia Corvus? Storm the Senate, demand a new trial? I am property now, owned by the Gladiator school. Even if every senator in Rome believed this document, the law is clear. Once condemned, always condemned. There might be a way," she said, stepping closer, despite every warning her rational mind screamed. My father has influence. He sits on the judicial committee. If I can convince him to review the case. Your father, Cassius laughed, but there was no humor in it. Marcus Aurelius Corvus, champion of Roman law and order, the same man who applauds when I spill blood on the arena sands for his entertainment. You think he'll risk his precious reputation for a gladiator slave? The words stung because they held truth. Livia's father was indeed a man of rigid principles, but those principles had always included an unwavering faith in Roman justice. The idea that the system could be so catastrophically wrong would shake the very foundations of his beliefs. He's a good man, she said quietly. When he sees the evidence, men like your father don't become powerful by admitting the system they serve is corrupt. Cassius turned away, his massive frame blocking the lamplight and casting her in shadow. You've taken a terrible risk for nothing, lady. This changes nothing. It changes everything. The words burst from her before she could stop them. It means you're not who they say you are. It means, she faltered, suddenly aware of how her confession might sound. Cassius turned back to her, his storm-grey eyes searching her face with an intensity that made her feel exposed, vulnerable. It means what, Livia? The way he said her name, soft and careful as if it were something precious, sent warmth flooding through her veins. She was walking into dangerous territory now, territory from which there might be no return. It means I was right. She stopped, biting back the words that would have revealed too much. Right to what? He stepped closer, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact, close enough that she could see the flecks of silver in his grey eyes, could count each individual scar that marked his warrior's body. Right to believe that the man I've been watching fight in the arena below is worth saving, she whispered. The confession hung between them like a bridge, neither dared to cross. Cassius stared down at her, this senator's daughter, who had risked everything to bring him hope he couldn't afford to embrace. Her dark hair had come loose from its careful arrangement, framing her face in soft waves. Her brown eyes held depths of compassion and courage that humbled him. You've been watching me fight, he said, his voice rough with an emotion he couldn't name. Every time, the admission cost her. He could see it in the way color flooded her cheeks. For months now, I told myself it was morbid curiosity, then intellectual interest in the games. But it wasn't. It was you. The way you fight with honor even when you don't have to. The way you help fallen opponents when the crowd isn't looking. The way you carry yourself like you remember what it was to be more than what they've made you. Her words were like water to a man dying of thirst. For 3 years Cassius had fought to survive, had killed to live another day, had endured the cheers of crowds who saw him as nothing more than a beast for their entertainment. To know that someone had seen the man beneath the gladiator's mask. Livia, he breathed, and without conscious thought his hand rose to cup her cheek. Her skin was silk beneath his calloused palm, warm and impossibly soft. Do you know what you're doing to me? She leaned into his touch, her eyes fluttering closed. Probably the same thing you're doing to me, she whispered. The space between them disappeared. His other arm encircled her waist, pulling her against him as her hands fisted in the rough fabric of his tunic. When their lips met, it was like the collision of two worlds, her privileged life of marble halls and silk cushions crashing into his reality of blood and sand and survival. The kiss was hungry, desperate, filled with months of longing neither had dared to acknowledge. She tasted like honey and wine, like everything good and pure he had lost when his world crumbled. He tasted like danger and strength, like all the excitement her carefully ordered life had been missing. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. Reality crashed back like cold water. He was a slave. She was a senator's daughter. He killed for sport. She lived in luxury. The gulf between them was wider than the arena floor, deeper than the tunnels beneath the Colosseum. This is madness, Cassius said, though his arms remained around her. If anyone discovers you here, let them, Livia said with a fierce intensity that surprised them both. I'm tired of living in a cage made of silk and propriety. I'm tired of being afraid." "You should be afraid," he said gently, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Not of me, but of what this could cost you. Your reputation, your family, your future, all of it could be destroyed." "Some things are worth destroying everything for," she said, looking up at him with eyes that held no doubt. "Some things are worth any risk." Sound from the corridor outside broke the spell, footsteps and the rattle of keys. The night guard making his rounds. Livia's eyes widened with panic, but Cassius was already moving, pulling her deeper into the shadows of his cell. "Stay silent," he breathed against her ear, his body shielding hers from view. "Don't even breathe." The footsteps paused outside his door, and Livia pressed closer to him, her heart hammering so loud she was sure the guard would hear it. Cassius's arms tightened around her, protective and strong, and she felt safer in this slave cell than she ever had in her father's villa. The footsteps moved on. They waited in the darkness, holding each other, both knowing that when she left this cell, everything would change. They had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed, started down a path that could only lead to joy or destruction, with no middle ground between. "What happens now?" she whispered. Cassius looked down at her, memorizing her face in the lamplight. "Now you go home, and we pretend this never happened." "I can't do that." "You have to, for both our sakes." But even as he said the words, he knew they were both already lost. The morning sun painted the marble floors of the Corvus villa in shades of gold and amber, but Livia saw none of its beauty. She had returned home before dawn, slipping through the servants' quarters like a thief, but sleep had proven impossible. Every time she closed her eyes, she felt Cassius's arms around her, tasted his kiss on her lips, heard the raw pain in his voice when he spoke of his betrayal. Now she sat in her father's study, supposedly reviewing household accounts, but the numbers swam meaninglessly before her eyes. The scroll containing Cassius's salvation lay hidden beneath her mattress, burning in her thoughts like a brand. How could she approach her father with such explosive information, without revealing how she had come by it? "You look pale this morning, daughter." Senator Marcus Aurelius Corvus entered the study with his characteristic measured stride, already dressed in his formal toga for the day's Senate session. At 55 he remained an imposing figure, tall, silver-haired, with the bearing of a man accustomed to command. His dark eyes, so similar to Livia's own, studied her with paternal concern. "I didn't sleep well," she said, which was certainly true. "Perhaps you're finally ready to consider Lucius Antonius's proposal," her father said, settling behind his desk. "Marriage would give you purpose, stability. A woman needs a husband's protection in this world." Livia's stomach clenched. Lucius Antonius was a young senator from a wealthy family, politically advantageous and personally repulsive. The thought of his soft hands touching her after knowing the strength of Cassius's calloused fingers made her feel physically ill. "I've told you, father, I'm not ready for marriage. At 28, you're already past the ideal age." "People talk, Livia. They wonder why Marcus Corvus's daughter remains unwed. Some suggest there's something wrong with you." "Perhaps there is," she said quietly. "Perhaps I want something more than a marriage of convenience to a man who sees me as a broodmare and political asset." Her father's eyes sharpened. "Love is a luxury, daughter. Duty is eternal. The Corvus name has stood for honor and service to Rome for 3 centuries. You will not be the one to tarnish it with romantic foolishness." The irony was bitter as poison. Here she sat, having spent the night in a gladiator's arms, while her father lectured her about honor and duty. But his words also sparked an idea, a dangerous, desperate plan that might be their only hope. "Father," she said carefully, "what if you discovered that a great injustice had been done, that an innocent man had been condemned for crimes he didn't commit? Would your duty to honor not compel you to act?" Marcus Aurelius leaned back, his expression thoughtful. "Justice is the foundation of Roman law, daughter. If such evidence existed, it would indeed be my duty to examine it. But such discoveries are rare. Our judicial system, while not perfect, rarely errs so dramatically. But if it had, If you held proof in your hands, then I would be bound by oath and honor to seek truth, regardless of the personal cost. He studied her intently. Why do you ask? This seems an odd philosophical discussion for breakfast conversation. Livia's heart hammered, but she forced herself to appear casual. I've been reading about historical cases of wrongful conviction. It's fascinating how truth can be buried by circumstance and politics. Her father nodded approvingly. Your interest in law pleases me. Perhaps when you marry you can counsel your husband on matters of justice. A wise woman can be a man's greatest asset. The conversation was interrupted by a commotion in the atrium, raised voices and the sound of hurried footsteps. A moment later, their household steward appeared in the doorway, his usually composed demeanor shattered by obvious distress. Forgive the interruption, Dominus, the steward said with a bow, but Tribune Gaius Varro requests immediate audience with you. He says it's a matter of utmost urgency concerning state security. Livia's blood turned to ice. Varro, the man whose treachery had destroyed Cassius, now standing in her home. Her father, unaware of her internal turmoil, merely nodded. Send him in, Marcus. State security takes precedence over breakfast. Tribune Gaius Varro entered with the swagger of a man secure in his power and position. He was younger than Livia's father, perhaps 40, with the soft features of one who had never known true hardship. His toga was expensive, his bearing confident, and his smile carried the practiced charm of a born politician. Looking at him, Livia felt rage burn in her chest like acid. Marcus, my friend, Varro said, clasping her father's arm in greeting. Forgive the early hour, but disturbing news has reached my ears. What news? Her father asked, gesturing for Varro to sit. Varro's gaze flickered to Livia, and she saw something calculating in his expression. Perhaps we should speak privately. This concerns sensitive military matters. My daughter has the discretion expected of a Corvus, her father replied firmly. Speak freely. Varro hesitated, then nodded. Very well. I've received reports that someone has been asking questions about old military records. Specifically records concerning the trial and conviction of the traitor Cassius Maximus. Livia's hands clenched in her lap, but she kept her expression neutral through sheer force of will. How had he learned of her research so quickly? Had she left a trail, or were there spies watching the archives? The Gladiator, her father asked, with mild interest. He's become quite popular in the arena. What possible interest could anyone have in his past crimes? That's what concerns me, Varro said, his tone grave. The man was guilty of the most heinous treachery, selling Roman blood for Germanic gold. His conviction was just and necessary, but now someone seeks to stir up old controversies, perhaps to embarrass those who brought him to justice. Who would do such a thing? Marcus Aurelius asked. I suspect political enemies seeking to undermine confidence in our judicial system, Varro replied smoothly. Or perhaps sympathizers of the gladiator himself. Some women, I'm told, find these arena fighters fascinating. They romanticize their brutality, ignore their crimes. The barb was clearly aimed at Livia, and she realized with growing horror that Varro suspected her involvement. But how much did he know? And how far would he go to protect his secrets? Surely you're not suggesting that anyone would be foolish enough to involve themselves with a convicted traitor, her father said with a slight smile. The very idea is absurd. Of course, Varro agreed, but his eyes never left Livia's face. Still, I thought you should be warned. If anyone approaches you with questions about Maximus or his trial, it would be wise to report them immediately. We cannot allow sentiment to override justice. Naturally, her father replied. Truth and justice are the foundations of Roman law. Indeed they are, Varro said, rising to leave. Oh, and Marcus? I believe your daughter attended the games yesterday. I hope she found the entertainment educational. The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Livia felt as if cold fingers were closing around her throat, but she forced herself to meet his gaze steadily. I found it fascinating, she replied, particularly the way some fighters maintain their honor, even in the most degrading circumstances. True character reveals itself under pressure, don't you think, Tribune? Varro's smile didn't reach his eyes. How philosophical of you, Lady Livia. Though I would caution that honor is meaningless without loyalty to Rome. A traitor remains a traitor, no matter how well he wields a sword. After Varro left, Livia's father turned to her with a troubled expression. That was an odd conversation. I've known Gaius for years, but something seemed off about his manner today. This was her opening, perhaps her only chance. Taking a breath that felt like swallowing fire, Livia made her choice. Father, she said quietly, what if I told you that Gaius Varro was lying? What if I had proof that he was the real traitor and Cassius Maximus was innocent? The silence that followed was deafening. Her father's face went through a series of expressions: surprise, disbelief, and finally a cold, terrible understanding. What have you done, Livia? The question hung between them like a sword, and Livia knew that her answer would change everything forever. There was no going back now, no safety in silence. She had thrown the dice, and whatever came next, she would face it standing beside the man she loved. I've discovered the truth, she said, lifting her chin with defiant pride. And I intend to see justice done. The storm was about to break, and she would not seek shelter. The silence stretched between father and daughter, like a chasm, filled with the weight of unspoken accusations and shattered trust. Marcus Aurelius Corvus stood frozen behind his desk, his weathered hands gripping its marble edge until his knuckles went white. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried the force of a thunderclap. Show me. Livia's hands trembled as she retrieved the hidden scroll from beneath her mattress, her father's footsteps echoing behind her like a funeral march. When she returned to the study, he was standing by the window, his silhouette stark against the morning light. She had never seen him look so aged, so fragile. Here, she said, placing the document on his desk, Tribune Varro's confession witnessed and sealed. Her father approached the scroll as if it were a viper, his trained legal mind already working to analyze and ask what he was about to read. Livia watched his face as he unrolled the parchment, saw the moment when shock gave way to understanding, then to a rage so pure and cold it made her step backward. Dear gods, he breathed, his finger tracing the damning words. Gaius, how could you betray me like this? How could you let an innocent man suffer while you... He couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't voice the magnitude of the betrayal. He needed someone to take the blame, Livia said quietly. Cassius had discovered his treachery. He was going to expose him. So Varro destroyed him instead. Her father's voice was hollow, stripped of its usual authority. Used our friendship, my trust in his word, to condemn a hero to slavery and death. He looked up at her with eyes that held a terrible new understanding. How did you come by this document, Livia? And don't lie to me. I've had enough lies to last several lifetimes. The moment of truth had arrived. Livia straightened her shoulders and met her father's gaze with all the courage she could muster. I've been researching Cassius Maximus for months. Something about his case bothered me, the speed of his trial, the convenience of his guilt, the way certain evidence was never examined. I bribed scribes, searched forgotten archives, followed every thread until I found this. That's not what I asked, and you know it. Her father's voice was dangerously quiet. How did you come to be interested in a gladiator's case? What drew your attention to him specifically? There was no point in half-truths now. I'd been watching him fight. He's different from the others. There's honor in him, nobility. I couldn't believe such a man was truly capable of treason. You've been watching him. The words fell like stones into still water. For months. Yes. And last night, when you left this house and didn't return until dawn. Where were you, daughter? Livia's courage nearly failed her, but she thought of Cassius alone in his cell, of the way he had held her, of the hope she had seen kindle in his eyes. Some things were worth any sacrifice. I was with him. I brought him the evidence of his innocence. The slap came so fast, she didn't see it coming. The crack of her father's palm against her cheek echoed through the study like a whip crack, and she stumbled backward, tears springing to her eyes more from shock than pain. In 28 years, he had never raised a hand to her. "You went to the Gladiator barracks," he said, his voice shaking with fury and something that might have been fear. "You, a senator's daughter, went alone to the cell of a slave. Do you have any idea what you've done? What this could mean?" "I know exactly what I've done," she said, lifting her chin despite the burning in her cheek. "I've given hope to an innocent man. You've destroyed us both." The words exploded from him like a dam burst. "If this becomes known, if anyone discovers where you were last night, your reputation is ruined forever. No man will have you. No family will associate with us. The Corvus name will become a laughing stock. Better a laughing stock than a lie," she shot back. "Better ruined with honor than pristine with blood on our hands." Her father stared at her as if seeing a stranger. "You speak of honor. You, who sneak through the night to consort with slaves. You, who throw away everything our family has built for 3 centuries for the sake of a gladiator's smile." The accusation hit closer to home than she wanted to admit, but she refused to back down. "I speak of justice, father. The same justice you taught me to value above all else. The same honor you claimed was the foundation of Roman law. Don't lecture me about justice," he roared. "I've served Rome faithfully for 30 years, upheld the law even when it cost me personally. But this madness you've embarked upon will destroy everything I've worked for." "Then help me save him," she pleaded, stepping closer despite his obvious fury. "Use your influence, your connections. Call for a review of his case. You have the power to right this wrong. Even if I believed this document, which I'm not certain I should, given how you obtained it, the political cost would be enormous. Varro has allies, supporters. To accuse him publicly would require irrefutable proof and perfect timing." "We have proof," she said, gesturing to the scroll. "His own hand, his own words. We have a document that could be forged, obtained through questionable means, presented by a daughter who has clearly lost all sense of propriety." Her father's voice was cold now, the initial explosion of rage giving way to calculating political instinct. "Do you think I can simply walk into the Senate and declare that one of our most respected tribunes is a traitor based on evidence brought to me by a lovesick girl?" The words cut deep, but Livia forced herself to remain standing. "You don't believe me. I believe you believe what you're saying, but belief and proof are different things in the eyes of the law." He moved to the window again, staring out at the bustling street below. "Even if this document is genuine, even if Varro is guilty of everything claimed here, the political reality remains unchanged. To champion a gladiator's cause would be political suicide. So you'll do nothing?" The disappointment in her voice was sharper than any blade. "You'll let an innocent man continue to suffer because it's inconvenient to save him." "I'll do what I must to protect this family," he said without turning around. "Starting with ensuring you never see that gladiator again." The words hit her like a physical blow. "Father, please, you are confined to this house until I can arrange your marriage to Lucius Antonius. The ceremony will take place within the month, before any whispers of your impropriety can spread." "No," the word came out as a whisper, then stronger. "No, I won't do it." He turned to face her then, and she saw that the father who had raised her with love and patience was gone, replaced by the cold, calculating politician who had survived decades in the Roman Senate. "You have no choice in the matter. You are my daughter, my property under the law, and you will obey." "I am not a thing to be traded for political advantage," she said, her own voice growing cold to match his. "I am a human being, with a mind and a heart of my own. You are a Roman woman of noble birth, and you will behave as such. Your romantic fantasies end now, Livia. Today." She looked at him for a long moment, this man who had taught her to value truth and justice, who now chose political expedience over both. When she spoke, Her voice was steady despite the tears threatening to fall. "I used to be so proud to be your daughter. I thought you were the most honorable man in Rome." "Honor is a luxury we can no longer afford," he replied. "Thanks to your actions, we must now focus on survival." As he turned back to the window, effectively dismissing her, Livia felt something break inside her chest. The father she had loved and admired was choosing his reputation over her happiness, his political future over an innocent man's life. The disappointment was so profound it took her breath away. But beneath the pain something else was growing, a determination forged in the fire of betrayal and loss. If her father would not help Cassius, she would find another way. If he would not choose love over politics, she would show him what real courage looked like. "I won't marry Lucius Antonius," she said quietly, not bothering to turn around as she walked toward the door. "You will do as you're told." She paused at the threshold, her hand on the doorframe. "We'll see about that." As she left the study, she heard him call her name, but she didn't stop. There was too much to do, too little time, and a man's life hanging in the balance. Her father had made his choice. Now she would make hers. That evening, as Rome settled into the purple shadows of dusk, Livia sat in her chamber, staring at the locked door that had become the symbol of her captivity. Her father had stationed guards outside, ostensibly for her protection, but she knew better. She was a prisoner in her own home, trapped by duty and fear masquerading as paternal love. But Marcus Aurelius Corvus had underestimated his daughter. 28 years of watching him navigate the treacherous waters of Roman politics had taught her more than he realized. She understood leverage, timing, and the power of information. Most importantly, she understood that sometimes the greatest victories required the greatest risks. A soft knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. Came the whispered voice of Claudia, her personal slave and closest confidant since childhood. "Enter," Livia called. Turning from the window, Claudia slipped inside, her usually cheerful face creased with worry. At 25, she had been born in the Corvus household and was more sister than servant to Livia. Her loyalty was absolute, her discretion unquestioned. "I brought your evening meal," Claudia said, setting down a tray that remained untouched. "Though I notice you haven't eaten all day." "I'm not hungry." Livia's voice was distant, her mind still working through possibilities and obstacles. "The household is in chaos," Claudia continued carefully. "Your father has been sending messages throughout the city. The servants whisper that a wedding is being arranged with great haste." Livia's hands clenched into fists. "Let them whisper. There will be no wedding." Claudia moved closer, her voice dropping to barely a whisper. "Domina, I must ask, is it true what they say about you and the gladiator?" For a moment, Livia considered denying it, maintaining the pretense that had governed her life for so long. But looking into Claudia's concerned face, she realized she was tired of lies, tired of hiding her true self behind the mask of a dutiful daughter. "Yes," she said simply, "it's true." Claudia's eyes widened, but there was no judgment in them, only worry. "Oh, Domina, what will you do?" "I'm going to save him," Livia said with quiet determination, "and I need your help to do it." "Anything," Claudia replied without hesitation. "You know that." Livia pulled her friend to sit beside her on the bed, speaking in urgent whispers. "Tomorrow night is the new moon. The arena will host special games to honor Mars, gladiatorial combats that continue past sunset. Cassius will fight." "How do you know this?" "I've been studying the schedules, learning the patterns. I know every detail of how the games operate." Livia's eyes burned with fierce intensity. "And I know that after the night games, the winning gladiators are allowed a brief celebration. Wine, food, temporary freedom within the barracks compound before returning to their cells." Claudia was beginning to understand. "You mean to meet him there?" "I mean to free him." The words hung in the air like a challenge to the gods themselves. "There's a servant's entrance to the gladiator compound that's poorly guarded during the celebration. I've observed it from the arena stands. 2 guards at most, usually drunk on victory wine. Domina, that's impossible. Even if you could reach him, where would you go? How would you survive? A fugitive gladiator and a senator's daughter. You'd be hunted to the ends of the earth. Livia had been thinking about this very problem for hours. I have jewelry, gold, enough to buy passage on a ship. There are places beyond Rome's reach. Britannia, the Germanic territories, even Gaul has regions where Roman law holds little sway. You would abandon everything? Your family, your home, your position in society. What position? Livia laughed bitterly. To be sold to the highest bidder, to spend my life as a political ornament in Lucius Antonius's house. That's not a life, Claudia. That's a beautiful cage. Claudia was quiet for a long moment, weighing her mistress's words. Finally, she spoke. What do you need me to do? Relief flooded through Livia, like warm wine. I need you to get a message to Cassius. Tell him about tomorrow night's plan. The celebration will be the perfect cover for an escape attempt. How am I supposed to reach a gladiator in the barracks? You have a cousin who works in the arena kitchens, don't you? Titus. Claudia nodded slowly. He prepares meals for the fighters, yes. But asking him to carry a message, tell him it's a matter of life and death, offer him gold if necessary. Whatever it takes, Cassius must know that help is coming. As they spoke in hushed tones, working out the details of their desperate plan, neither woman heard the soft footsteps in the corridor outside. Neither saw the shadow that paused at the door, listening intently to their treasonous words. The next morning brought disturbing news that sent ripples of concern throughout the Corvus household. Tribune Gaius Varro had been found dead in his villa, apparently the victim of a robbery gone wrong. Thieves had ransacked his study, stolen valuable items, and left his body in a pool of blood. But Marcus Aurelius, studying the official report in his study, wasn't convinced. The timing was too convenient, the circumstances too neat. As a man who had survived 3 decades in Roman politics, he recognized an assassination when he saw one. The thieves were very selective, he murmured to himself, scanning the list of stolen items. They took gold and jewelry, but left documents scattered, almost as if they were searching for something specific. A chill ran down his spine as he remembered Varro's visit the previous morning, his obvious nervousness, his pointed questions about someone investigating old military records. Had someone silenced the tribune to prevent him from revealing dangerous secrets? His thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. One of his household guards entered, his face grim. Dominus, we have a problem. The Lady Livia, she's gone. Marcus Aurelius shot to his feet, his heart hammering against his ribs. What do you mean, gone? She was in her chamber this morning when we brought her breakfast. But when we checked an hour later, the room was empty. The window opens onto the garden wall. Search the house, Marcus commanded, his voice deadly calm despite the panic rising in his chest. Check the stables, the servants' quarters, everywhere, and send word to my contacts throughout the city. I want her found. As the guard hurried away, Marcus Aurelius sank into his chair, the full magnitude of the situation crashing down upon him. Varro was dead, quite possibly murdered to keep his secrets buried. His daughter had vanished, almost certainly attempting some foolhardy rescue of her gladiator lover. And somewhere in the shadows, forces were moving that could destroy everything he had spent his life building. For the first time in years, the unflappable Senator Marcus Aurelius Corvus felt the cold touch of genuine fear. Meanwhile, in a modest inn on the outskirts of Rome, Livia sat disguised in the rough clothing of a common citizen, her distinctive dark hair hidden beneath a worn cloak. Claudia sat beside her, equally disguised, both women trying to project calm confidence while their hearts hammered with terror and anticipation. The message was delivered, Claudia reported quietly. Titus confirmed that he spoke with the gladiator personally. He knows to expect you tonight. Livia nodded, her fingers unconsciously touching the leather pouch, containing her mother's jewelry, her inheritance converted to escape money. And the ship, Captain Marcus promises passage to Gaul, no questions asked. If you reach the harbor by dawn. Everything was falling into place with the precision of a military campaign, yet Livia couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into a trap, that forces beyond their understanding were manipulating events toward some predetermined conclusion. But when she thought of Cassius alone in his cell, counting down the hours until what might be his final fight, all doubt vanished. Whatever the cost, whatever the risk, she would not abandon him to die as a slave when she had the power to offer him freedom. "Are you ready for this?" Claudia asked softly. Livia looked out the window toward the Colosseum, where even now preparations were being made for the night's deadly entertainment. Somewhere in the bowels of that massive structure, the man she loved was preparing to fight for his life, not knowing that his greatest battle was yet to come. "I've never been more ready for anything in my life," she said. The die was cast. Tonight, under the cover of darkness and celebration, they would attempt the impossible. They would defy the might of Rome itself in the name of love, and if they failed, they would die together rather than live apart. The roar of 50,000 voices shook the very foundations of the Colosseum as Cassius Maximus stepped onto the blood-soaked sand of the arena floor. Torches blazed from every tier, their flickering light casting dancing shadows across the expectant faces of Rome's citizens. The night games in honor of Mars were always the most brutal, the most spectacular, and tonight the crowd sensed something special was about to unfold. Across the arena, 3 opponents waited for him, not the usual criminals or captured barbarians, but seasoned gladiators, each a champion in his own right. This was no ordinary match. This was intended to be an execution disguised as entertainment. Cassius understood immediately. Word of Vero's death had reached the right ears, and someone had decided that the gladiator, who knew too much, needed to die before he could become a problem. 3 against 1, no mercy, no reprieve. They meant for him to fall tonight, to bleed out on the sand while the crowd cheered his demise. He almost smiled. They had no idea that death held no fear for him anymore, not since Hope had walked into his cell in the form of a senator's daughter, with eyes like dark honey and courage to match any warrior's. Even if he died tonight, she had given him something precious, the knowledge that he was not forgotten, that someone believed in his innocence. The master of games raised his staff, and the arena fell silent except for the whisper of wind through the massive structure. "Citizens of Rome," his voice boomed across the sand, "tonight we honor Mars, god of war, with combat most glorious. Behold, Cassius the Destroyer faces the champions of 3 schools." The crowd erupted again, bloodlust thick in the air. In the imperial box, wealthy senators and their wives leaned forward eagerly, jeweled goblets raised in anticipation. Somewhere among them sat Marcus Aurelius Corvus, his face a mask of controlled anguish as he watched the man his daughter loved prepare to die. But Cassius wasn't looking at the crowd. His eyes swept the arena entrances, searching for any sign of the rescue Claudia's whispered message had promised. Part of him hoped Livia would stay away, would choose safety over this desperate gambit. But a larger part, the part that had fallen hopelessly in love with her fierce spirit, prayed she would come. The signal horn sounded, and the 3 gladiators rushed him simultaneously. Cassius moved like liquid lightning, his gladius singing through the air to catch the first attacker's thrust and turn it aside. His shield took the impact of the second man's mace, the shock running up his arm like fire. The third circled behind, looking for an opening, his net and trident weaving a deadly pattern. For long minutes Cassius fought the battle of his life. His opponents were skilled, coordinated, and fresh, while he bore the accumulated wounds and exhaustion of years in the arena. Blood streamed from a dozen cuts. His breathing grew labored, and still they pressed their advantage. The crowd was on its feet now, sensing the tide turning against their former favorite. Cassius stumbled, went down on one knee as the mace wielder's weapon grazed his skull. The retiarius stepped forward, with his trident raised for the killing blow. Time seemed to slow. Cassius looked up at the weapon that would end his life and thought of Livia's face, the way she had looked at him with such faith and love. If this was his end, at least he would die with her memory as his final thought. But the trident never fell. A roar of confusion rose from the crowd as smoke began pouring from the gladiator entrances. Not the clean white smoke of ceremonial braziers, but thick, black smoke that spoke of fire and chaos. Shouts echoed from the tunnels below, and the orderly flow of the games ground to a halt. In the confusion, Cassius rolled away from his distracted opponents and regained his feet. Through the swirling smoke, he saw a figure in a dark cloak, gesturing frantically from the tunnel entrance. Even disguised in at this distance, he would know that silhouette anywhere. Livia had come for him. His heart soared even as his mind calculated the impossibility of what she was attempting. The arena was surrounded by guards. The tunnels were a maze that led either to the gladiator quarters or to more guards. How could she possibly expect to get him out alive? But then he remembered her words. Some things are worth destroying everything for. She was willing to die for love, just as he was willing to live for it. The three gladiators, realizing their prey was escaping, rushed him again, but something had changed in Cassius. The desperation of a dying man had been replaced by the fierce determination of one who had everything to fight for. His blade moved like a serpent, finding gaps in armor, drawing blood, forcing his opponents back. One by one, they fell, not dead. He was still Roman enough to show mercy when possible, but wounded badly enough to remove them from the fight. As the last opponent collapsed, clutching a gashed shoulder, Cassius was already running toward the tunnel where Livia waited. The arena erupted in chaos as officials tried to understand what was happening. In the imperial box, senators shouted conflicting orders, while guards ran in all directions. The carefully orchestrated execution had become a farce, and someone would pay dearly for this embarrassment. Cassius reached the tunnel to find Livia and Claudia waiting with desperate urgency written across their faces. Behind them, the corridors echoed with shouts and running feet. Their diversion had worked, but not for long. "This way," Livia gasped, grabbing his arm. Claudia found a service tunnel that leads to the street level. They ran through passages that reeked of sweat and fear and old blood, their footsteps echoing off stone walls that had witnessed countless deaths. Behind them, pursuit was organizing with frightening efficiency. Whoever had orchestrated tonight's execution clearly had resources and determination. "Here," Claudia called, pointing to a narrow opening barely wide enough for a man. "It leads to a drainage culvert beneath the street." As they squeezed through the opening, Cassius caught Livia's hand. "You came back," he said, wonder in his voice. "Did you think I wouldn't?" she replied, her eyes fierce even in the darkness. "I hoped, but I also feared for you." "Fear later," she said with a smile that made his heart race. "Live now." They emerged into the drainage system beneath Rome, a forgotten network of tunnels that carried away the city's waste and rain. The smell was overwhelming, but it was the smell of freedom, and none of them complained. "The harbor is 2 miles south," Livia said, as they hurried through the tunnels. "Captain Marcus is waiting, but we must reach him before dawn." "What about your father?" Cassius asked. "What about your life here?" Livia's laugh echoed off the tunnel walls, but it held no joy. "My father chose politics over truth. As for my life here," she squeezed his hand tighter, "my life is wherever you are." Behind them, somewhere in the darkness, they could hear voices. Their pursuers had found the tunnel entrance. Time was running out, and the most dangerous part of their escape still lay ahead. As they ran through the bowels of Rome toward an uncertain future, Cassius marveled at the woman beside him, a senator's daughter who had given up everything for a slave's love, who had risked death to offer him freedom, who ran now through sewers and shadows without a single complaint. Whatever happened next, whatever trials awaited them in the unknown lands beyond Rome's reach, He knew one thing with absolute certainty. Livia Corvus was the strongest, most courageous person he had ever known, and he would spend whatever life remained to him proving worthy of her sacrifice. The harbour district of Rome never truly slept, but in the darkest hours before dawn it dozed fitfully. Merchant ships creaked at their moorings, while dockworkers dozed against coils of rope, and the air hung heavy with the scent of tar, fish, and distant spices. It was here, among the maze of piers and warehouses, that desperate souls could disappear into the wider world, if they had coin enough and courage to spare. Livia, Cassius, and Claudia crouched behind a stack of amphorae, their clothes still reeking of the sewers, their faces streaked with grime and exhaustion. 2 hours of running through Rome's underground labyrinth had brought them here, but every shadow seemed to hide potential enemies, every sound might herald their discovery. "There," Claudia whispered, pointing to a modest trading vessel tied at the 3rd pier, the Minerva. "Captain Marcus should be aboard." Cassius studied the ship with the tactical eye of a former military officer. It was well positioned for a quick departure, its sails already loosely rigged for immediate departure. But between them and freedom lay 50 yards of open dock, illuminated by torches and patrolled by harbour guards. "Too exposed," he murmured. "If they've discovered our escape route," his words proved prophetic. From the direction they had come, the rhythmic tramp of military boots echoed through the narrow streets. Torchlight flickered between buildings as search parties spread through the harbour district like a net closing around trapped fish. "Praetorian Guard," Cassius breathed, recognizing the discipline of their movement. "Someone with serious authority wants us back." Livia's face went pale in the torchlight. The Praetorian Guard served only the emperor and the most powerful senators. For them to be hunting a runaway gladiator and a senator's daughter meant this had escalated far beyond a family dispute or even a matter of escaped property. "My father," she whispered, "he must have called in favors, used his influence." "No," Cassius said grimly, his soldier's instincts analyzing the situation. "Your father would send city guards, maybe urban cohorts. Praetorians mean imperial interest. Someone wants to ensure we never tell our story." The implication hung heavy between them. Varro's death, Cassius's planned execution in the arena, and now the Empire's elite forces hunting them. They were caught in something far larger and more dangerous than a simple case of wrongful conviction. A new voice cut through the night air, cultured and commanding. "Search every ship, every warehouse. They cannot have gone far." Livia's blood turned to ice as she recognized the speaker. Lucius Antonius, her intended husband, strode onto the docks in full senatorial regalia, flanked by Praetorian officers. His usually soft features were set in hard lines of determination and barely controlled rage. "He knows," she breathed. "Somehow, he knows about us." Cassius pulled her deeper into the shadows as soldiers began systematically searching the nearby vessel. Their window of escape was closing rapidly, and soon they would be trapped between the searching guards and the open water of the harbour. "Can we reach the ship?" Claudia asked desperately. Cassius shook his head. "Not without being seen, and even if we could, they'd catch us before we cleared the harbour." As if summoned by his words, a figure detached itself from the shadows near the Minerva. Captain Marcus, a grizzled ex-Navy man with the weathered face of one who had spent his life at sea, approached their hiding place with careful steps. "Lady Livia," he whispered urgently, "the situation has changed. Word came an hour ago there's a bounty on your heads, and harbour officials have been bribed to watch for anyone matching your descriptions." "How much of a bounty?" Livia asked, though she dreaded the answer. "Enough to buy 3 ships like mine," Marcus replied grimly. "Someone wants you very badly." The sound of approaching boots grew louder. They had perhaps minutes before the search reached their hiding place, and nowhere left to run. Cassius felt the familiar calm that came before a hopeless battle, acceptance that had carried him through so many fights in the arena. "Take the women and go," he told the captain quietly. "I'll create a distraction. Draw them away." "No," Livia said fiercely, grabbing his arm. "We stay together. Be practical," he urged. 3 have no chance, but you two might escape while they're focused on me. I didn't risk everything to watch you sacrifice yourself, she replied, her eyes laze with determination. We escape together or not at all. Their argument was interrupted by a commotion near the harbour master's office. Shouts rang out, followed by the sound of running feet and clashing steel. Someone else was causing trouble in the harbour district, and the search parties were converging on the new disturbance. Now, Captain Marcus hissed. While they're distracted, they ran for the ship, keeping low and moving as quietly as possible. Behind them, the sounds of conflict grew louder, steel against steel, men shouting orders, the crash of something heavy falling. Whatever was happening, it was drawing the guards away from the docks. They reached the Minerva, just as Marcus's crew was casting off the mooring lines. Hands pulled them aboard, while the captain barked orders in the urgent whisper of men who knew their lives depended on speed and silence. Who's causing the distraction? Livia gasped as she was helped over the rail. Her answer came in the form of a familiar voice cutting through the night air. Stand down. By order of Senator Marcus Aurelius Corvus, you will cease this search immediately. Livia's heart clenched as she recognized her father's voice, raised in authority and anger. From the ship's deck, she could see him striding through the harbour district, flanked by his own guards, confronting the Praetorian search parties with the full weight of his senatorial dignity. He came, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. He actually came. But even as the Minerva slipped away from the dock, propelled by both oars and the evening wind, Livia could see that her father's intervention was doomed. Lucius Antonius emerged from behind a warehouse, gesturing angrily, and more Praetorians appeared from side streets. Her father was vastly outnumbered, his authority outweighed by whatever forces had been arrayed against them. Father, she called softly across the widening gap of water, though she knew he couldn't hear her. As if sensing her gaze, Marcus Aurelius turned toward the harbour just as his daughter's ship disappeared into the morning mist. For a moment their eyes met across the impossible distance, and she saw in his face not anger or disappointment, but love and desperate hope. Then the mist closed around them, and Rome vanished into the grey dawn like a dream half-remembered. Cassius found Livia standing at the stern rail, watching the coast of Italy fade into the distance. Tears tracked down her cheeks, but her expression was resolute rather than despairing. Regrets, he asked gently, taking her hand. She was quiet for a long moment, then shook her head. Sorrow, yes, for leaving him, for the pain this will cause him, but no regrets. She turned to face him, her eyes clear and determined. I chose love over duty, truth over comfort. Whatever comes next, I can live with that choice. Cassius pulled her into his arms, holding her against his chest as the ship carried them toward an uncertain future. They were free, but they were also exile, cut off from everything they had ever known, hunted by forces whose reach might extend far beyond Rome's borders. But they were together, and for now, that was enough. Where do we go from here? Claudia asked, joining them at the rail. Captain Marcus overheard and approached, his weathered face thoughtful. Gaul has Roman settlements, but also wild lands where a man can disappear if he chooses, or we could sail north to Britannia. The tribes there have little love for Rome and might welcome those who've defied the empire. Somewhere we can build a new life, Livia said firmly. Somewhere we can be more than what Rome tried to make us. As the sun rose over the Mediterranean, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, the three refugees sailed toward an unknown destiny. Behind them lay everything they had ever known: family, fortune, status, security. Ahead lay only possibility and each other. It was, Cassius thought as he held the woman he loved, more than enough. 3 months had passed since the Minerva had carried them away from Rome, and the small fishing village on the coast of northern Gaul had become their unlikely sanctuary. Here, Among the Celtic fishermen and farmers who cared little for Roman politics, they had found a measure of peace that felt as fragile as morning mist. Cassius stood on the cliff overlooking the grey waters of the northern sea, his hands rough now from honest labor rather than the arena's violence. The local chieftain, Brennus, had accepted them without question, once Cassius proved his worth by helping defend the village from Saxon raiders. A warrior's skill was currency understood in any language, but peace, Cassius had learned, could be more challenging than war. "You're brooding again," Livia said, approaching with the quiet grace that still took his breath away. Even dressed in the simple woolen clothes of a Gallic woman, even with her hands calloused from helping the village women with their daily tasks, she remained the most beautiful sight he had ever seen. Thinking, he corrected, pulling her into his arms. "There's a difference. About Rome." He nodded, unable to lie to her. "Captain Marcus brought news yesterday. Your father has been stripped of his position in the Senate. Lucius Antonius accused him of treason for helping us escape." Livia's face went pale, though she had been expecting this news for weeks. "Is he alive, but under house arrest? His property has been seized, his name struck from the rolls of honor." Cassius's voice was heavy with guilt. All because he chose to save his daughter rather than preserve his political standing. She was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the endless expanse of water that separated them from the life they had left behind. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady despite the tears gathering in her eyes. "He made his choice, just as we made ours. He knew the cost. Did any of us really understand what we were sacrificing when we ran into the night?" The question hung between them, heavy with months of accumulated doubt and pain. Their love had survived the transition from senator's daughter and gladiator to simple villagers in a foreign land, but the weight of what their freedom had cost others pressed down on them like a physical burden. Claudia appeared at the crest of the hill, her face flushed from running. "Cassius, Livia, come quickly. There are ships on the horizon. Roman ships." They ran back to the village to find chaos erupting in the narrow streets. Brennus and his warriors were already arming themselves, while women gathered children and prepared to flee inland. On the horizon, 3 Roman galleys approached with the purposeful speed of hunting wolves. "How did they find us?" Livia gasped, but Cassius was already calculating distances and possibilities with the tactical mind of a soldier. "It doesn't matter," he said grimly. "They're here now, and running is no longer an option." Captain Marcus appeared at their side, his weathered face grim. "I can have the Minerva ready to sail in an hour, but those galleys will catch us before we clear the bay." "Then we don't run," Cassius said quietly. "We make our stand here." "Against Roman legionnaires?" Brennus approached, his Celtic accent thick with disbelief. "You ask us to die for strangers." "I ask nothing," Cassius replied with dignity. "This is your land, your choice. But if you fight alongside a man who will never retreat, never surrender, never leave his friends to face death alone." The Celtic chieftain studied him for a moment, then nodded slowly. "You saved my daughter from the Saxon raiders. Blood debt runs deeper than political dispute." He turned to his warriors. "Prepare the defenses. We make the Romans pay for every step." As the village erupted into controlled chaos, preparing for siege, Livia pulled Cassius aside. Her face was pale but determined, and he recognized the expression that had first drawn him to her, courage in the face of impossible odds. "There's something you need to know," she said quietly, "something I should have told you weeks ago." "What is?" She took a breath that seemed to encompass all her fears and hopes. "I'm with child, Cassius. Our child." The words hit him like a physical blow. Joy and terror warred in his chest as the implications crashed down upon him. A child, their child, growing within the woman he loved more than life itself. And Roman ships approaching with orders that certainly included no mercy for rebels and fugitives. "How long?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. 2 months, perhaps 3. "I wasn't certain until recently." She placed his hand on her still flat belly, her eyes searching his face. I know the timing couldn't be worse. The timing is perfect, he said fiercely, pulling her against him. It gives me everything worth fighting for. But even as he held her, Cassius felt the cold weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. A child changed everything. It was no longer just their lives at stake, but the life of an innocent who had never chosen this path, never asked to be born into exile and danger. The sound of war horns echoed across the water as the Roman ships entered the bay. On the Lid galley's deck, figures in expensive togas were visible alongside the armored shapes of legionnaires. This was no simple military expedition. Important people had come to ensure the fugitives were brought back to face justice. There, Claudia said, pointing to the lead ship, in the white toga with the purple stripe, is that Lucius Antonius, Livia confirmed, her voice filled with loathing. He's come personally to drag us back. But it was the figure standing beside her former betrothed that made Cassius's blood run cold. Even at this distance, even aged by months of disgrace and house arrest, the man's bearing was unmistakable. Your father, he said quietly. Livia's intake of breath was sharp as a blade. There, on the deck of the enemy ship, stood Marcus Aurelius Corvus. Whether he came as prisoner or willing participant, his presence changed everything. As the Roman ships anchored just outside the bay and prepared to send landing craft ashore, a white banner was raised on the lead galley, a flag of truce, a request for parley. They want to talk, Brennus observed. Probably demand we surrender without a fight. Let them come, Cassius said, his hand instinctively moving to the sword at his side. But they'll find we have words of our own to share. As the landing boat approached the shore, carrying figures in senatorial togas under the protection of Praetorian guards, Cassius felt the familiar calm of a man facing his final battle. But this time, he wasn't fighting alone. This time, he had everything to lose and everything to protect. The woman he loved, the child she carried, the friends who had accepted them. The simple, honest life they had built from the ashes of their former existence. Some things, he thought as he watched the Romans beach their boat, were indeed worth destroying everything for. The final confrontation was about to begin. The meeting took place on the beach, where the grey waves whispered against weathered stones and seabirds cried overhead like the voices of forgotten gods. Cassius and Livia stood side by side, their hands clasped, while behind them the Celtic warriors waited in grim silence. Before them, the Roman delegation approached, with the measured steps of men carrying the weight of empire. Marcus Aurelius Corvus walked like a man aged beyond his years, his shoulders bowed not by physical burden, but by the crushing weight of impossible choices. When he drew close enough for Livia to see his face clearly, she gasped at the transformation. The proud senator she remembered was gone, replaced by a hollow-eyed man whose silver hair had gone white and whose face bore lines carved by months of anguish. "Father," she whispered, taking an involuntary step forward before catching herself. Lucius Antonius raised his hand, calling a halt to the Roman party just beyond sword's reach. He had grown harder in the months since their escape, his soft features sharpened by authority and barely contained rage. When he spoke, his voice carried the cold precision of a man accustomed to obedience. "Livia Corvus," he announced formally, "you stand in violation of Roman law, having fled a lawful betrothal and aided in the escape of condemned property. Cassius Maximus, you are a runaway slave whose very existence outside the arena constitutes theft from your legal owners." His eyes swept the assembled Gauls with contempt. "And you barbarians harbor enemies of Rome at your peril. We harbor friends," Brennus replied in heavily accented Latin, his hand resting on his sword hilt. "Those who shed blood defending our children earn the protection of our spears." But Cassius barely heard the exchange of threats and posturing. His attention was fixed on Marcus Aurelius, reading the subtle signs of a man caught between love and duty, honor and survival. The senator's eyes kept darting to his daughter with an expression of such profound pain that it was difficult to witness. "Why did you come, father?" Livia asked, her voice carrying across the space between them like an accusation and a plea. For a moment, the political masks fell away, and Marcus Aurelius was simply a father looking at the daughter he feared he might never see again. When he spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "Because Lucius promised that if I helped retrieve you, if I convinced you to return willingly, your punishment would be merciful. House arrest instead of execution, slavery instead of death. And if I refuse..." The senator's face crumpled. "Then the Celtic village burns. Every man, woman, and child who aided your escape will be sold into slavery. And you," he couldn't finish the sentence, "will die." Lucius Antonius finished with obvious satisfaction. "Along with your gladiator lover and anyone fool enough to stand with you. The choice is simple. Livia, your freedom for the lives of innocents." The ultimatum hung in the salt air like a sword suspended by a thread. Around them the Celts shifted restlessly, understanding enough Latin to grasp the threat to their families. Cassius felt Livia's hand tighten in his, felt her trembling as she faced the impossible choice between love and the lives of those who had sheltered them. "There is another option," a new voice said quietly. Everyone turned to see Marcus Aurelius step forward, separating himself from the Roman party. His weathered face held the resolve of a man who had finally chosen his path, regardless of the consequences. "Father, no," Livia breathed, recognizing the look in his eyes. "3 months ago," Marcus continued, his voice growing stronger with each word, "I chose political expedience over truth. I let fear guide my actions instead of honor. I failed as a father and as a Roman." He reached into his toga and withdrew a familiar scroll, the evidence of Varro's treachery that had started their entire journey. Lucius Antonius's face went pale. "Marcus, what are you doing?" "What I should have done months ago," the senator replied. He unrolled the document and began to read in the clear, carrying voice of a man trained to address the Senate. "I, Gaius Varro, do confess to the crime of treason against Rome, having sold military intelligence to Germanic tribes in exchange for gold." "Stop," Lucius commanded, but Marcus continued reading, his voice echoing off the cliff walls, "and having arranged for the false conviction of centurion Cassius Maximus to hide my crimes. Let this confession stand as testimony to my guilt and his innocence." The words fell into silence, broken only by the crash of waves and the cries of seabirds. The Praetorian guards looked uncertainly at their officers, while the Celtic warriors gripped their weapons more tightly. Everyone understood that the political landscape had just shifted beneath their feet. "A forgery," Lucius said desperately, "obviously fabricated to save your daughter's reputation, witnessed by centurion Marcus Brutus, and sealed with Varro's personal seal." Marcus Aurelius continued relentless. "Both marks verified by the Senate's own archivists. Before I was stripped of my position." He looked directly at Cassius. "You were innocent, Centurion Maximus. Rome wronged you, and I wronged you by choosing politics over justice." Cassius felt something break apart inside his chest, not his heart, but the bitter shell of cynicism that had protected it for so long. To hear those words from a senator of Rome, to have his honor acknowledged before gods and men, was worth more than all the victories in the arena. But the moment of vindication was shattered by Lucius Antonius's harsh laugh. "Touching," he sneered, "but ultimately meaningless. Innocent or guilty, he remains property of the gladiator school. And you, Livia, remain bound by law to marry me. Your father's dramatic gesture changes nothing. It changes everything," Marcus Aurelius said quietly, "because I didn't come here alone." He raised his hand, and from behind the rocky outcroppings along the shore, figures emerged. Roman figures, but not the expected reinforcements. These were older men, gray-haired and dignified, wearing the togas of senators. Livia recognized several faces from her childhood. Friends of her father, men of honor and influence, who had served Rome with distinction. "Senator Quintus Fabius," Lucius stammered. "Senator Gaius Marcellus."
"What are you doing here?"
"Our duty," Quintus Fabius replied gravely. when Marcus brought us evidence of judicial corruption, when he showed us proof that an innocent man had been condemned while the real traitor went free, we had no choice but to act. The Senate has voted, Gaius Marcellus added. Cassius Maximus is hereby pardoned of all crimes and restored to his rank and citizenship. Furthermore, the betrothal contract between Lucius Antonius and Livia Corvus is declared null and void, having been arranged through fraudulent circumstances. Lucius's face twisted with rage. You have no authority here. This is military jurisdiction. Actually, another voice said from behind the Roman party, it's imperial jurisdiction now. The speaker was a man Livia didn't recognize, but his purple-striped toga and the immediate deference of the Praetorian guards marked him as someone of immense importance. When he stepped forward, even Lucius Antonius bowed his head in respect. Legate Titus Flavius. The man introduced himself, speaking with the authority of Emperor Domitian himself. It seems this situation has attracted imperial attention. The legate's gaze swept over the assembled group, with the calculation of a man accustomed to making decisions that affected thousands of lives. The emperor is displeased, he continued, to learn that corruption within his own government has led to such complications. Innocent blood, spilled for entertainment, loyal citizens driven into exile, barbarian tribes provoked into potential rebellion. His eyes fixed on Lucius Antonius with obvious distaste. Someone must answer for these failures. What followed happened with the swift, brutal efficiency of Roman justice. Lucius Antonius, stripped of rank and authority, was led away in chains to face charges of conspiracy and corruption. The Praetorian guards, acting on imperial orders, began preparing for immediate departure, and in the midst of the political upheaval, a father and daughter looked at each other across months of pain and separation. "Can you forgive me?" Marcus Aurelius asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Livia crossed the space between them in 3 quick steps and threw herself into his arms, tears streaming down her face. "Can you forgive me for leaving you, for causing you so much pain? My brave, stubborn, impossible daughter," he murmured into her hair. "There's nothing to forgive. You chose love over duty, and in the end, love proved to be the highest duty of all." As father and daughter embraced, Cassius stood watching, with emotions too complex to name. Justice had been served, honor restored, family reunited. Everything he had dreamed of during those long months in the arena had come to pass, but he also knew that this moment of triumph carried its own terrible price, one that would soon tear his world apart once more. The celebration in the Celtic village lasted 3 days, but for Cassius, each moment of joy felt borrowed, stolen from a future that grew darker with each passing hour. He stood now on the same cliff where he and Livia had shared so many quiet conversations, watching the Roman ships prepare for departure. Tomorrow they would sail back to Rome, Livia as a free woman, himself as a pardoned citizen and restored centurion. Everything they had dreamed of had come to pass. Justice, freedom, honor restored. So why did victory taste like ashes in his mouth? The answer came in the form of symptoms he had tried to ignore for weeks. The persistent cough that grew worse each day, the fever that burned through him in the dark hours before dawn, the blood he had begun spitting into rags he quickly burned, the wounds of the arena, the years of violence and privation, the poisons his body had absorbed. They were claiming their price at last. He was dying. "There you are," Livia's voice carried on the evening wind, as she approached with her characteristic grace. Though he could see the changes in her now, the slight rounding of her figure that spoke of their child growing within her, the glow of happiness that made her more beautiful than ever. "Father was looking for you. He wants to discuss your reinstatement ceremony in Rome." Cassius turned to face the woman he loved more than life itself, memorizing every detail of her face in the golden light of sunset. How could he tell her that their triumph was hollow, that the future she dreamed of would never come to pass? How could he destroy her joy with the truth that was slowly destroying him? "Livia," he began, then stopped as another coughing fit seized him. This time he couldn't hide the blood that stained his hand when it passed. Her face went white with sudden understanding. "How long?" she whispered. The same question he had asked when she revealed her pregnancy, but carrying infinitely more pain. "Months, perhaps. Maybe less." He reached for her, but she stepped back, denial written across her features. "No, we'll find healers in Rome, physicians with skills the village healer lacks. There are treatments, medicines." "My love," he said gently, "I've seen this sickness before. In the barracks, in the army. There is no cure, only time." She stared at him for a long moment, then collapsed to her knees on the clifftop grass, her hands pressed to her belly, where their child grew. The sound that escaped her was neither sob nor scream, but something more primal, the cry of a soul being torn in half. Cassius knelt beside her, pulling her into his arms as she shook with the force of her grief. "Listen to me," he whispered urgently. "Our child will never know slavery, never know the shame of false accusations. He will grow up free, in Rome, with your father's name and protection. That's more than I ever dared hope for. Our child will grow up without his father," she said through her tears. "And I will grow old without the man I love." "You will live," he said fiercely. "You will be strong for our child. You will find happiness again. You will honor what we had by building something beautiful from what remains." But Livia pulled back to look at him with eyes that held a terrible new resolve. "What if I choose not to?" The question hung between them like a blade. Cassius felt his heart stop as he understood her meaning. "Livia, no. Why should I return to Rome without you? Why should I pretend to want a life that you won't share?" Her voice was calm now, frighteningly calm. "I have poison in my travel pack, something for cleaning wounds that becomes deadly in larger doses. We could go together, Cassius, into whatever comes after, side by side, and our child would die with us, yet, but would never suffer, never know loss, never face the pain of living in a world too cruel for pure love to survive." For a moment the temptation was overwhelming to die in her arms, to escape the slow degradation of his disease, to avoid the agony of leaving her behind. It would be so easy, so peaceful. They could lie down together on this clifftop and simply stop. But then he thought of Marcus Aurelius, who had sacrificed his career and risked his life to save them. Of Claudia, who had followed them into exile without hesitation. Of the Celtic villagers, who had bled defending strangers. Of all the people who had chosen love over safety, hope over cynicism, courage over despair. "No," he said quietly, "that's not who we are. It's who I am without you," she replied. "Don't you understand? You saved me from a life of meaningless luxury, showed me what it means to truly live. How can I go back to existing when I've known what it is to be alive?" Cassius cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away tears that seemed to spring from an inexhaustible source. "Because that's what love means, not just the joy of being together, but the courage to carry on when we must be apart. Not just the pleasure of shared happiness, but the strength to honor that happiness even when it's gone." "I can't," she whispered. "I'm not strong enough. You are the strongest person I have ever known. You defied your father, challenged Rome itself, risked everything for what you believed was right. You will find the strength because you must, for our child, for your father who needs you, for the memory of what we had." They held each other as the sun set over the grey waters, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson that seemed to reflect the beauty and pain of their love. Around them the world continued its ancient rhythms, waves washing the shore, birds calling to their mates, the eternal dance of life continuing despite individual tragedy. "How long do we have?" Livia asked finally. "Maybe through the winter, perhaps until the child is born." "Then we have now," she said with sudden fierce determination. "We have today, and tomorrow, and every moment until the gods call you home. And I will love you with everything I have for every heartbeat that remains." They returned to the village hand in hand. Their decision made, they would return to Rome, would claim the future they had won through sacrifice and struggle. Cassius would live as fully as his failing body allowed, would see his child born, would use whatever time remained to build something lasting from the ashes of their trials, and when the inevitable end came, he would face it knowing that he had loved completely and been loved in return, that their child would grow up free and honored, that their story would endure long after their bodies had returned to dust. 6 months later, in a villa outside Rome, gifted by a grateful emperor, Cassius Maximus held his son for the first and last time. The boy had Livia's dark eyes and his father's strong hands, and when he gripped Cassius's finger with surprising strength, the dying warrior felt his heart break and heal simultaneously. "Marcus Cassius Corvus," Livia whispered, naming their son for both grandfathers. "He'll know who his father was, what you stood for, why you were worth loving." As dawn broke over the 7 hills of Rome, painting the marble walls in shades of gold, Cassius closed his eyes and let himself drift away on waves of perfect peace. His last sight was Livia's face, beautiful and tear-streaked, and filled with a love that would echo through generations. His last thought was gratitude, for justice served, honor restored, and a love that had proven stronger than empire itself. Some stories end with death, but theirs would live forever in the child they had created, in the lives they had touched, in the proof they had offered that even in the darkest times, love could conquer all, not by defeating death, but by creating something eternal in the face of mortality. The gladiators' war was finally over. Love had won.